Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Make Better. We have a special guest here, Lindsay from Ad Results Media. Lindsay, it's so great to have you.
I'm super excited to be here. I've been missing being on a podcast since closing my own. We had a podcast called On the Mic, which I produced and hosted for 3 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And we ended our run last year. Yeah, last December 2022.
Wow. And Lindsay, you've been in this space for a while outside of just having the podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about what Ad Results Media does, what you do there, anything, your sort of expertise lies in?
Yeah, so it's media. Obviously, our focus is on audio-based advertising. We've been in the space since 1998, started off with radio. I have been here for 8.5 years, and it's really been a ride. Our podcasting presence was very small when I joined, and so I seemed to get in at the right time. I had actually been doing some voiceover for some other podcasts at the time when I joined Ad Results, so I was able to kind of come in and give some feedback on performance and kind of how to look at it from like the creator's perspective rather than just buying and strategy. From there, I actually built out Ad Results' creative department, hired our very first copywriters, introduced our production arm. Yeah, had a big hand in a lot of that. Right now, the department is made up of 2 different teams. We have our creative team, so that's our copywriters and our producers. And then we also have our audio insights team, and that team is really interesting. They listen to the ad reads that are placed by Ad Results, and they offer feedback on how to improve them. They ensure that there's a really strong relationship between brand and host. And we also do a lot of external research as well. So how our audience is feeling about the brands, how our audience is interacting with the ad reads. We have found some really interesting ways to try to speak to audiences in ways that haven't quite been explored yet. So one of our big pushes this year and then into 2024 is kind of moving beyond the 60-second ad read as we currently know it. And we've been pulling in different elements from like TikTok trends to what are folks doing on YouTube. It's been a lot of fun.
On that, because I love that you have the creator division and then you also have like the strategy and stuff. So on the creator side, you said lots of copywriters. How has ChatGPT and all of this AI stuff changed the way you guys are thinking? Are you using it? Have you, hired ChatGPT on as a supplemental team member? Is anything changed?
No, nothing has really changed. I would say, if anything, we have used it to help with some of our translations as we expand into like Spanish speaking areas, or we even ran on some German podcasts and, we kind of explored the translation functions. But, we're of the opinion that we're really trying to be authentic and genuine. Yep. And a lot of that comes from human experience. Yep. So you need that human voice there to help create those stories.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I love to hear that because obviously it's affecting a lot of industries, but I think, especially in the podcast ad space, it's never going to be able to fully understand all the things that you guys and your copywriters do from their experience, at least not yet.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no. Yeah, there's a lot of nuance and context that gets lost. We've done some testing, but it hasn't quite. Nothing beats the human experience.
Absolutely. Amazing. And before we dive in, we talk a lot on the podcast about, obviously it depends on what type of ad it is, but if it's like a host endorsed, baked in ad and stuff, Adam and I are big fans of just like, the ads should be content focused. They might not, and we went back and forth with Stu on this, they might not be the perfect ad where you have no idea it's an ad, right? Like that's too much to ask, but it should be, related to the content. It should feel natural and it should be almost such like something that the listener doesn't want to miss, right? Because it's part of the podcast. Do you feel that same way? How do you approach, or are there any high level like themes that you go into when you're reviewing or creating ad creative?
Yeah, no, I love to hear that. One of the things that we have been saying throughout this year is that we want to approach ad reads. We call them ads as content. So even if the host for some reason can't tie it into whatever their show theme is, whatever their topic is, we want to still approach it as like, hey, here's like an additional little like interesting tidbit that you don't want to miss. Like maybe there's some history here. Maybe there's like a
Ooh.
storytelling element. And so, like I mentioned, how we're trying to explore areas outside of the ad read as we know it currently. We've also been talking about like, how can we expand on a brand story across time? Can we tie like pre-rolls and mid-rolls together? Do you get like a little cliffhanger at the top of the read?
Ooh.
And then, when you hit your mid-roll, like, do we finish telling the brand story? So yeah, I totally agree. I absolutely think it should be content. Like, you really want the listener to not just tune out, it's another ad read. I've heard this a million times.
I love the concept of moving beyond that 60-second ad read and stuff, but I was just trying to imagine like what that would look like, right? Because we're so stuck in the like, this is how it is, right? Oh, make it content first, add a hook and those sorts of things. And I think it's easy to think those things can't change. But what you just said about like, maybe it's the pre-roll is the intro and then the mid-roll is something like that's so creative and totally something worth testing. Really, really cool concept.
To piggyback on what you were saying there, Lindsay, I love that so much because I come from a generation that grew up watching YouTube content, and YouTubers figured this out really early where ads can become content, not just ads, where they found ways to integrate it into the content of their video. It could be a mommy vlogger walking through their house and all of a sudden they kind of pit stop by the bathroom and they're showing off this brand new tushy or whatever they've got going on in there.
Exactly.
And it just happens to fit into their house tour, and then they talk about their promo, and it feels like it's more integrated into the content, and it feels a lot less like an ad and far more organic. And that's something that podcasting inherently will struggle with just because of the lack of visual element on the audio side of things. But then addition to that, it struggles because the content can feel so rhythmic, where it's a true crime episode. It's really hard to integrate in a product into a true crime narrative in such an organic way unless it coincides really well with it. So creativity is the name of the game, and that's where I think certain creators will really stand out as we go into 2024 and into this new generation of podcasting. So I'm all in on that. I love the way that you're looking at for more integrated content-driven ads.
On that note, should we dive in?
Yes, let's do it.
Let's
do it. All right. So the first ad we're going to listen to is Beam CBD. Adam, you know them, right?
Yeah. We actually work with them. So
okay.
We are just starting to launch some of their campaigns. So I believe the ad that we're running on is prior to them working with us. So I'm excited to listen to it.
Anything else you'd want to share about them? They're a CBD supplement, right? And I think it's like for working out, it's for sleeping.
So right now, predominantly Beam is pushing their sleep product, which is their Beam Dream. It's hot cocoa that is infused with melatonin, CBD, reishi, L-theanine, and a number of other things. It tastes great, feels great, and it knocked me right out before I even got halfway through an episode of Drive to Survive on Netflix. So it worked for me. I love the product, love the team there, and excited to listen to this ad. They're honestly really, really great, and it tastes good too.
All right, so this one is on the Matt Welsh show. It is I believe Welsh. I believe it's a pre-roll actually. And Adam, we haven't done too many pre-rolls, which is why I wanted to include this one in. So it's a pre-roll, and let's give it a listen.
Are you ready to discover the incredible benefits of a good night's sleep? It's time to awaken your senses and embrace the importance of restful slumber. Dive into the world of sleep and introduce yourself to an amazing product that could revolutionize your nighttime routine. Beam Dream is a game changer. Their Dream Powder, a hot cocoa designed specifically for sleep, could transform your nights with flavors like cinnamon cocoa and chocolate peanut butter that make it a treat to sip on before bedtime. Dream contains a powerful all-natural blend of ingredients, including magnesium, L-theanine, I think. Anyway, whatever it is, it's good. Helps you fall asleep, stay asleep, and help you wake up refreshed. Just mix Beam Dream into hot water or milk, stir or froth, and enjoy before bedtime. Your body and mind deserve the gift of restful nights. Try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder. Get up to 40% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/Walsh and use code Walsh at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/Walsh and use code Walsh for up to 40% off.
Interesting. So again, context, Matt Walsh show, pre-roll ad. Lindsay, let's pass it off to you. What are your initial high thoughts?
Well, immediately, I love that it's like hot chocolate. I really would have liked to hear him talk about what he liked about it. He struggled to say L-theanine, which is fine. But then, the most that we got was however you say it, it's great. And I think that with such an interesting product, like, He could have talked about his bedtime routine or the flavors that he liked. Like immediately I was like, oh my gosh, I could totally incorporate this into my bedtime routine. And that seems like something, it's a universal experience, right? Like we all, even if we don't realize it, everybody has the very specific things they do before bed. And I think it would be pretty easy to kind of incorporate that story into this read. I mean, overall it was fine, but I definitely think that it lacked personalization.
Yeah. Adam?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, it was missing any me statements. It was not an endorsed read from the perspective of the host saying, I love this product. I think you could love this product too. It does give like a general like recommendation to say like this product could revolutionize your nighttime routine. And so perhaps it just means that he hasn't tried the product. This is a non-endorsed ad. It could be coming from like a news politics, journalistic standpoint where they can't give an endorsement products in the same capacity. However, I totally agree. Like it feels like I didn't really get enough to compel me to cross the finish line to actually understand what the product is. Is it going to taste good? I don't know. Because when it comes down to a couple things, when I think about a good ad read, is I want to know if you're the host that's influencing me, like, do you actually like the way that this thing tastes? And truthfully, it does taste good. It's got an earthier flavor to it. It tastes like a healthy hot chocolate. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't taste like it's full of sugar, at least to me. But my roommates love it. Like they love the flavor of it. I like the flavor of it. And that is part of the compelling nature of like when you hear about all these like good for you types of products, at some level, people just want to know, does it also taste good? Yeah. Is it something that I can enjoy? And he says there's flavors, but doesn't really give context for like, oh, I like really enjoy it. Or my wife really likes this. Or even just give a contextual fit for it, like create the theater of the mind. Then on top of that, he does struggle with the word L-theanine. And to add on to that, that adds to my point where I don't know if he's actually tried it or understands the product. And this comes across more like he's just doing a scripted read for the product without knowing a lot about it, which can become less influential for the read. The one other thing I do want to note that is a plus for me is actually where this ad is placed, because it is a pre-roll because it's right at the very beginning, but it's after they've introduced the content of the episode. So it's not right at the very top of the episode at 0000. It comes in 1 minute into the episode after they say, today on the Matt Walsh Show, another female celebrity, so on, so on, so on. And then they jump into the ad read, which I really prefer because it gives the person who's listening time to listen and get into the episode, settle down, and then you hit them with the ad so they can't just hit that skip button right away to get to it. So overall, that would be my thoughts.
Go ahead, Lindsay.
I agree with the taste, kind of keeping in mind that it is a CBD product. Like there are a lot of CBD products out there, right? Like it's very saturated. And so you really need that personalization in order to kind of cut through the noise, right? Like it's very easy to be like, here it is, try it.
Well, actually, notably, he doesn't even mention CBD in the read. And I can give context for this, knowing them as a client that we work with. They have two main variations of their product. They have their Beam Dream with CBD and Beam Dream without CBD. And so some hosts don't like talking about CBD because they're not akin to it or they don't want to promote it. That's totally okay for Beam. Some shows can just promote the non-CBD. So in this case, they don't talk about CBD. And for them, CBD is such a small part of what their product is. The core of their product is melatonin, magnesium, L-theanine, et cetera, all these other sleep aid products. And CBD just happens to be an additional part of it, like an ingredient, less to the forefront. Because I think you're right, Lindsay, that CBD has become such a competitive category, especially in podcasting, because CBD couldn't really advertise on a lot of other mediums and it found its way through podcasting. And Beam kind of said, you know what, why are we trying to compete on CBD when we could just compete on better night's sleep?
Keeping that in mind then, like, because that's really great to know. Keeping that in mind, I would have definitely, if he was struggling to kind of give his own story, I would definitely kind of encourage him to talk more about like what L-theanine does, because unless you're, a supplement person, you don't know. So I think that is another area where probably copy could be tweaked a little bit, so the audience could have a better understanding of like, what am I putting in my body?
Yeah, no, totally. Go ahead, Adam.
And one other question I want to ask to all of us is something that we don't always talk about is this the right product for the show? Does it make sense for this product to be on this show? Whether or not you know the show or not, but in the context, Matt Walsh Show, it's a news politics show, conservative leaning. So does this make sense for Beam to be on this show in terms of context? Would you see this as a good fit? I can give my answer. I think it does make sense. I think the average type of person who tunes in to news politics content regularly is a high stress individual because they care a lot about what's going on in the media, and that can be stressful. And so if you are a stressed out individual, you may not be sleeping very well, and therefore a product that is a sleep aid or sleep supplement would be a very, very good fit for you. Does it make sense out front where you're like, oh, wow, this podcast is about sleep or nutrition or health and fitness? Not necessarily, but I think the type of person that could benefit from being would be listening to this show.
Yeah, it's affinity.
That'd be my thoughts.
Yeah. Any thoughts there, Lindsay?
No, I agree. And that's a conversation that we also have a lot internally. Like, okay, does this product fit? Maybe we want to test it, but making sure that the way that we feature the product in our creative fits the show.
Mm-hmm.
No, So yeah, I could see focusing on sleep, because you're right. People who are tuning in, even if they don't realize it, if you tune into news content consistently, you are probably stressed. You may not realize that's the cause, but it's probably stressing you out. Yeah, helping them sleep at night seems like a good idea. But also keeping that in mind, if they are more conservative leaning, I would be sure to better outline what is in the product. Because like I said, they may not know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's such a good point. I mean, I totally agree with both of you on the taste thing. And we've talked about this a lot. And Adam, you can't always have a perfectly host endorsed ad read, right? That where they've actually tried it and that's, whatnot. But, he probably could have pulled in some reviews or something, even if he hadn't tasted, he could have been like, thousands of people say it's, one of the best tasting things they've tried, or it's their new favorite to hot chocolate or something like that. So I think even without, having that host endorsed thing, there probably could have still been that third party validation around. And then the L-theming thing's really interesting, because we've talked about this again, Adam, when a host messes up or like says something wrong, it actually adds an element of authenticity to it. But I think that was missed here, because instead of him sort of making a joke about it, and then to your point, Lindsay, going and explaining what L-theming is, even though he can't pronounce it right, it made it sound like he was reading off a script and he just didn't know what the word is and he sort of moved on. So I think that was a miss there, because it could have actually added that authenticity, because L-theming's a hard word to pronounce, especially when you're just reading it for the first time. But I think that instead, the way that he sort of delivered it came off again as he just sort of messed up and kept going. Super, super interesting. The last thing I wanted to ask too. So Adam, to your point about how the ad didn't start right at 0-0. Obviously, there's probably people that have best practices and people that would disagree with that and that sort of thing. Is this something we're seeing happen more? Lindsay, do you guys take this into consideration? Is this something you ask a show to do, or is this just sort of standard? They either insert it at the first, couple seconds, or they wait a little bit?
I mean, on our end, it really varies show to show. Most established hosts have their breaks where they're going to do their reads. So, when we come along, we're just like, well, just make sure it's a mid-roll. Wherever it falls is fine, as long as it's, 5 minutes into the show or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I find that they tend to choose that. That's a whole other topic that I could talk about forever. The benefits of running earlier in a show rather than, later in the episode. So let me stop there before I go on a tangent.
No, but I love that. I mean, it's one of those interesting things, because every show has a different way of doing it. And like, that's great. And they obviously know their stuff best. But I sometimes, when we talk about these things, Adam, because I totally agree with you, right? Like when I listen to the Morbid podcast, I skip through the first 3 minutes, like just even as a podcast advertiser, right? Like I know they're going to just talk about general stuff and there's going to be an ad. And I wish that wasn't the case, but maybe if they had sort of introduced themselves first or something, or had a piece of content that I didn't want to miss, I would be less likely to do that. Going back to your point, making that ad a content thing. So it's just interesting that, like, yes, there are best practices and all of that sort of stuff, but I think in a positive way, some of these shows and stuff should get together and think about some of these ways in which they can switch this stuff up without being so rigid. This is just how we do it.
That's kind of what I was going to say. My take on it is we do have some legacy hosts that I think could benefit from changing it up a little bit. To your point about Morbid, kind of having their banter at the beginning and they do an ad, all the way to folks like Crime Junkie. They have like a little music break. And so you hear that and you're like, oh, well, here comes their ad read. Mm-hmm. So I do think that we are kind of entering an era where there probably is some listener fatigue, where hosts may want to not only zhuzh up their reads, but maybe where they place them.
Yeah. Which again, and I'm not somebody that's actually placing ads on podcasts right now, but I feel like it shouldn't be the most difficult thing ever. And I'm really excited because I think that's going to become more of part of the conversation. That stuff is really, really interesting. And there's a lot of different levers you can pull outside of just the ad creative and the targeting that can probably start to help improve performance that we should all be discovering and interested in testing out.
I was going to add there's one stat in which I think leverages why I believe that if you're going to do a pre-roll, you should do it a little bit after you start introducing, is that I think it's somewhere still close to about 49% of people consume podcasts while driving. And if they're starting their podcast before they start driving and there's ads right away, they have the freedom because they haven't started driving to just hit that skip button. Because I'm assuming that everybody's a law-abiding citizen that doesn't text while they drive, obviously. But if you put the ad in about 1 minute in or even a minute 30 in, it's a good chance they're already on the road, they're moving. There's a less of a desire to pick up the phone and hit that skip button just because they're in process of doing something else. So it's naturally going to hit them a little bit easier. That is my biggest reason for why I believe that it works a little bit better when it's about a minute in rather than right off the top. It's just less skippable.
Yeah. I also just think, like, again, going back to my morbid thing, like, every time I listen, I skip. I know, like, they've trained my behavior to know that that's going to happen. And I almost feel like figuring out how to like mix it up a little bit and adding that variability, you're retraining the behavior to, I'm not going to take the chance and skip 3 minutes because I don't know what I'm going to miss. And maybe the ad's 5 minutes in, or maybe it's 30 seconds in and stuff. So I think that's another really interesting thing, because when we stick with those sorts of things, where again, we're training that user to, recognize that, right when they say this halfway through the episode, there's going to be an ad, versus, all right, let's move it a little bit just so people aren't, that's not a habit for them.
It's like what Lindsay was saying about the music for Crown Junkie. It's like your signal that, it's about to be ad time, because you know it's coming when you hear that noise. And people are very trainable in that regard. And so you don't want to train them to skip your ads. You want to train them to listen to your ads or whatever it is. So anyways, I think we're all in alignment. Do you want to give some scores for this read?
Let's do some scores, yeah.
Okay, I'll kick it off. I think that this is a very middle of the line, mediocre read. You don't really get a lot of info. Good call to action in terms of like very clear where to go, what to buy, so on. I don't think that's complicated. I think they do it a very straight read. I'm going to call it a 5 out of 10. Okay. It's nothing that gets me out of bed. Yeah.
Lindsay?
Yeah, I think I'm aligned there. I was thinking 4 or 5 out of 10.
Cool. I was going to give it a 5. So neat. Well, again, I mean, I think overall, like if I was Beam, maybe I would still be happy with it, again, thinking that maybe they can't, it can't be perfectly host endorsed and it's a pre-roll and that sort of stuff. But
ask our rep if he's happy with it.
What was that?
I'll ask our rep if he was happy.
Yeah, ask your rep. Okay, cool. Well, let's move this along. We'll go on to the next one. So another CBD company, even though this wasn't specifically their CBD product, Beams, that is, but CBD Distillery. We're going to be listening to an ad on the Jim Cornette Experience podcast. Are you guys familiar with that one?
Yes. I am. Jim Cornette's very viral right now with a lot of this drama going on in the podcast industry, which we maybe need to do a different episode to cover later.
Maybe we do. I need to hear this.
Oh, right. I would love that.
Let's give it a listen.
It can't be wrong.
That can't be wrong.
Because I'll tell you what, that's what all the customers are saying over at cbdistillery.com. They're saying, if taking your products are right, I don't want to be wrong. Or are they saying, if taking your products are wrong, I don't want to be right? I'll tell you what is right. 90% of customers report better sleep with CBD, and 81% say that CBD helps calm them from stress and anxiety. 80% report less pain after exercise or physical activity, and 1% find that they can will themselves into another dimension. You can enjoy better focus and concentration with their full range of carefully formulated CBD and other plant-based solutions over there at cbdistillery.com when you use the promo code JCE for this program. Jim Cornette Experience, JCE. See what they did there. And Brian, you can't go wrong with a product recommended by Mayo Clinic trained internist and preventive health specialist, Dr. Kevin Fry. Glenn Fry's older brother.
No relation to Glenn Fry whatsoever.
I heard that when Glenn made himself a hippie and went out to the Rainbow Room or wherever and goddamn on a Sunset Strip, that meanwhile Dr. Kevin was going to all the fine medical schools around the country, learning to help people get involved in CBD. One had a peaceful, easy feeling, and the other one wanted to give you a peaceful, easy feeling. You know, there are over 2 million satisfied customers of CBDistillery.com. Were you aware of that, Brian?
Yes.
Did you know that their products are packed with whole body healing plant compounds and vital nutrients that you'll need to take with you to that other dimension that you'll be able to will yourself into after you get on this stuff real regular? And I'll tell you what.
I don't know about that, but there are parts of that yes, and there are other parts.
You might not even notice it because everything else will look exactly the same, and all the people that you know here will be there. It's just the sky is either purple or green.
I don't think
depends on the weather over there.
I don't think that's how it works. And I will say I did use some of CB Distillery's fine products on my knee recently as I've been recovering from my knee injury.
Yes, where you were taken down and mugged at gunpoint and suffered that severe injury.
I didn't go to Suffolk County. What are you talking about?
Actually, no, you fell down in your own home and you hurt yourself, and now you're expecting the people at CBDistillery.com to make you feel better. I think that's very selfish. There's a bunch of people out there that have injuries and problems sleeping and problems with stress and anxiety and concentration and focus that are not even their fault. And here you're just clumsy. And you're using up all the CBD. Well, they got more, folks. At CBDistillery.com. You fell down in your own home and you injured yourself.
My knee. It was my knee went out. I didn't do anything.
All right. I'll pause it there. This is a long one. It's actually like 4 minutes and like 30 seconds or something, which is one of the reasons why I picked it. So the rest sort of just goes on. They keep talking a little bit and I'll actually have the actual clip in there. And then they do the whole URL promo code thing. But yeah, who wants to kick it off?
So if you don't know, Jim is an old wrestling guy. So he's a real character. Like he was like a commentator and like a manager. So like this is the kind of content that his listeners are tuning in for. And he makes it kind of clear that he doesn't totally understand CBD with his references to moving into another dimension.
Purple and green sky.
Yeah. I think he's a little confused. It doesn't have psychedelic properties. But this is very entertaining. Like
It's content.
I personally love this.
Yeah.
This is content. Yeah.
Yeah. It feels like you could have this may not even be an ad read. This is like just part of his podcast where he's just telling a story. It doesn't feel like you're even part of an ad at this point. Like if I'm a listener, I'm not upset at all that I'm being advertised to for 4 minutes because it feels like it's just more Jim Cornette experience. It is the experience of Jim Cornette and it just happens to be talking about a product. And you're just like pulled into this story that's so ridiculous of him going back and forth with his co-host, where his co-host is reining him in during this ad read, and it just feels so real, organic, and very like pre-2020 style of podcast ad read that you would expect from back in the day where there wasn't a lot of rules. There were just people out in the Wild West just shooting shots and saying, hey, this is an ad that we're doing. It feels very real.
It's so unfiltered to your point. Yeah. Which I think is just beautiful. I mean, I'm sure they didn't pay for a 4-minute spot, but these guys just went off. I mean, I will say like I was lost at some points, but I don't think that matters again, because like they kept bringing me back in and I was like, okay, did we move on from the ad? Oh, we're still talking about the product. Like it was just like ridiculous. And I don't listen to this guy's show, but I'm sure that's exactly what his content sounds like. And then, halfway through it, they started getting into the like how they've actually tried it. He had mentioned the knee thing, and then they went into that whole ridiculous story. But like, there was that like touch of like, they really use it. They mentioned, I mean, they hit on everything. Like, I think there were some weird pauses in between stuff that probably could have been cleaned up, but maybe that's part of the show. I just think like we could probably have listed out all the value props they talked about. I mean, the customer reviews they pulled in, the use cases, like it really hit every single one. And I think that can be accomplished in something that's under 4 minutes. But yeah, that was hilarious.
Yeah, this would be a good example of one that I would pull as like kind of a best of, which I know bucks some people's best practices of like, hey, you've got to hit on the motivate your audience. You got to hit on your reasons to buy. But like, this is so classically Jim. Like, his listeners probably weren't skipping this. Like we were sitting here laughing, listening to it. Like, that they were engaged as well. And that's equally important. And I think that gets lost sometimes. Like, I would much rather have this sort of experience than for him to hit on every single bullet point that we handed to him.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. This reminds me of like the classic timeless Sherry's Berries ads from Bill Burr, him going off for 13 minutes. This is like a microcosm of what that was from back in the day, right?
Yes.
This is what I think classic podcast ad buyers are like, oh, I would hope that once a week an ad comes out like this where you're just hearing someone go off. I get giddy for ads like this just because it feels real and you can tell that the host cares enough to do this. It's not just a job. It's not just a paycheck. They're having fun with it and they're making it work. And I imagine it would be hard for me to believe that this didn't do well for the brand at the end of the day.
Neat. Should we score it?
Yes.
All right, Lindsay, what do you think?
I want to hear y'all scores first.
Okay. Wait, maybe we write them down, and so that we're not influenced by the other ones. Does everybody have a little piece of paper or something in front of them?
I have mine. I'm good. I'm good
Oh
to
my
go.
gosh,
whenever.
I don't have a pen.
Okay, no worries.
Hold on.
All right.
I can put it on my phone.
Okay.
Let me put it in a note.
I can write mine down right here.
Is
I don't know if
everybody
y'all
ready?
will be able to see this. Yes.
Do you want me to go first?
No, let's just raise them up, and then we'll have everybody explain their scores. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. 12.
Mine's
8.5.
backwards. 8.5.
Nice.
Wait, so 8.5. Amelia, you were.
I said 12. I was just like, I fucking love it.
Lindsay, what was your score?
I gave him an 8.
Okay.
So Amelia, you rated it above the scorecard. So
Yep.
I don't know what's going on
But
there.
it's not allowed,
but
but yeah.
Lindsay and I were actually really close there. And I'm really curious, Lindsay, why you wouldn't have given it a 10, because I have my reasons why I would dock it down just a little bit. Even though we talked about how amazing it was, there's a lot that is really good here. There's a few things that I feel like knocked it down a couple pegs. But Lindsay, I do want to hear what your thoughts were first.
So my two main reasons that I knocked him just a little bit was the length. Sorry, my dog shook her head. Was the length. It was getting a little long.
Mm-hmm.
And internally we have found that spots that run over 60 seconds do perform better for us. But there is a law of diminishing returns. If they start going too long, you do start to lose folks. On top of that, I loved the humor, and personally I liked that he didn't totally get CBD, but I would have liked to maybe see a little more understanding from him of the product. And that's really the only thing for me.
That literally the exact same points that I would have given is I felt like it was just a bit too long, in the same way that Amelia, we paused it before we even got to the end because we were here to critique this ad and we didn't even make it to the end because it was just becoming a little bit too much, and then agreed. I wish that Jim knew a little bit more about the product so it didn't come across as though he wasn't familiar. Like Purple and Green Sky, it's funny, it's humorous, and it's good content, but did it actually convert people? Because if they don't still know what the product is or how it works or what it does, you've missed something at the end of the day.
Very true. And if people are looking to buy CBD and they don't know about it, and now they're being told that it is like a psychedelic. Oh, what a little cutie. Now it is like a psychedelic. I mean, they're not going to, that might turn some people off. Wow, those are such great points. And now that I think about it, you're totally right. I mean, the fact that we literally paused it, and 4 minutes isn't that long, but like we weren't even going to listen to it all. That actually makes me want to bring my score down. Not to mention, I think some of the real substance was in those last 2 minutes, and that totally could have been moved up to the top, because I think if there were people that skipped it, they missed that personal testimonial, they missed the story about how he used it for his knee, and they probably could have explained that a little better too. Why is CBD good for your knee? What was in it that helped with the arthritis or whatever it was? And so yeah, I mean, I really liked it. Again, I think it was awesome, but those are really, really good points that now that I'm thinking about it, I probably would adjust my score. Cool. Any other last minute thoughts?
No.
All right.
Next
one, here we go. This is Babbel. Are you guys familiar with the app Babbel?
Mm-hmm.
It's like Duolingo, like one of those, teaches you how to speak different languages and stuff. This one was on the 20,000 podcast, I believe. Wait,
20,000 Hertz.
Triple check. 20,000 Hertz podcast.
It's a podcast all about diving into sounds and where they came from and whatnot. So
really?
Different. Yep.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's lovingly crafted podcast that reveals the stories behind the world's most recognizable and interesting sounds.
Oh, recognizable. Now I want to listen to this. Okay. So Babbel, 20,000 hertz. This is a mid-roll. It's relatively new. Let's give it a listen.
It's a beautiful summer day in Paris. You're sitting on a bench on the banks of the Seine, overlooking the Eiffel Tower. Then, someone approaches you to ask for the time.
Excusez-moi, quelle heure est-il?
You clutch your partially chewed baguette and begin to panic.
Come on, middle school French, don't let me down.
If only you had tried Babbel. Babbel is a language learning software and e-learning platform that will help you feel confident on your next trip abroad. It's designed and recorded by real people so you can have real conversations. With Babbel, you can start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Here's a special limited time offer that's just for 20,000 Hertz listeners. Get 55% off your Babbel subscription at babbel.com/20k. That's babbel.com/20k for 55% off. babbel.com/20k. Rules and restrictions may apply.
All right, there we have it. So the one thing I didn't mention about this, and we're all aware now, but this is the other ones we listened to were host read. This is pre-produced or produced, as we call it in the Podscribe platform. So good context there. Definitely a different ad read than we usually review. So yeah, who wants to kick it off?
Amelia, why don't you kick off?
Why don't I kick it off? It was interesting. Now that you gave me context about the 20,000 Hertz podcast, I'm wondering if it's similar to some of those fiction podcasts we were listening to, Adam, where like they sort of have to be pre-produced, or maybe it fits again a little more into the content rather than, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe they are just two hosts talking and having conversations about stuff. But if it isn't, and it is more of that sort of like fiction style, then this pre-produced one that is like telling a story with the background noises and the characters and the actors, maybe that does make sense. I'm not the biggest fan of that, especially if it isn't, that's not what the host is or the show's actually about, because I think maybe the theater of the mind, it did pull me in there, but I think that Paris one, like I liked where they were going, but it didn't click with me. And I think that it was just a little bit too specific of a story that is going to be hard to relate with everybody. Now, if I've had that experience, or I've traveled to Paris, or if I love baguettes or whatever it is, maybe that was like, oh my God, right there. Yes, I need Babbel. I've totally experienced that, but they probably could have widened that story a little bit, like more, so that it could have, given the theater of the mind to a broader audience. So that was like my first thing. But other than that, I mean, I did like the way that they talked about the exclusiveness of the offer. I think it's a lot of times it's just they lay out the vanity URL and they talk about the promo. And sometimes they add in like, this is only a special promo, but I felt like this was a very specific offer for this podcast and Babbel, which I, again, appreciated. And I think hosts in general could probably make a little more enticing when they're talking about promo codes.
So I do have a question, because I haven't listened to this show in a while. Was that the host?
I don't know. Let's see real quickly. I can view the full transcript.
I'm pretty sure it is. It's a very, very smooth voice. I'm listening to part beforehand.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
I didn't know
I feel like I recognize his voice, so I wanted to check. But because I was gonna say, if this was like a generic like pre-produced, I have differing opinions on that. Okay, let me pause because I don't know what you want to edit out.
Oh, good. No. Yeah, I think do we think it's the same host?
I do think it is, just based on the voice. I'm listening to it right beforehand, and it does sound like it's the same.
Okay. So that means they went into a production studio, crafted this whole thing with the host and all of the sounds. This wasn't they handed them an audio clip. What were you saying, Adam?
Yeah, and they made jingles and all that stuff for it, I'm assuming, which would be contextual to the type of podcast that they create. It's all about sound, so it would make sense.
So these types of reads are very polarizing, I have found. I think given the nature of this specific podcast, it makes sense to do it this way, because you do have the background sounds, and you've got the music and the crickets when they couldn't think of the reply, which I like a lot. And these are all areas that we're also exploring, at Ad Results, how to kind of build out these stories with sound effects and, fitting music and whatnot. I think it works. And I'm curious about y'all's, maybe we can talk offline about the fiction podcasts, because you are right. They do very similar things here. So I think kind of keeping that context in mind, this probably spoke to their audience. And I think that that's something else that's really important to remember when listening to these. Just because the creative doesn't necessarily resonate with you, if it is something that fits within their show and with their listeners, it makes sense, right? And so, I don't know. I like it. It tells the story about, like, man, I took French in high school. I wish I would have kept up with it. And I mean, I know that I took Spanish in high school, and I wish I would have kept up with it. So I can personally relate, and it speaks to me as someone who actually just recently moved. And, I'm like, man, actually revisiting my Spanish lessons would probably be helpful. Maybe I should try Babbel. So, like, personally, it speaks to me. So I find it quite compelling.
Okay, that's super interesting. And I totally relate to that same experience where it's like, damn, I took 8 years in high school and stuff, and I could, maybe speak a couple words, Donde está el baño and stuff like that. But again, I think like, and that's great that we both pulled that out of it. And maybe that was like, that's all they need to do. But again, I think the story they were telling was so specific with like Paris and that sort of thing. And maybe that's the audience and all that sort of stuff. But I think, again, they probably could have just broadened it a little bit. And even then just like talked about that exact experience a little bit more, rather than trying to paint you in a picture in Paris with your baguette. They could have just been like, it's so frustrating, that all of us we're forced to take years of language classes, and we, majority of us probably don't remember anything and are not conversational. And that's, that sucks. And I'd be like, yeah, that did suck, and yada, yada. So totally agree with you there, Lindsay.
Yeah. So once upon a time, I attended some online marketing conference thing, and I listened to a talk from a guy named Benton Crane. He's behind Harmon Brothers and runs a lot of their ad creatives for brands that do big YouTube campaigns, behind like Squatty Potty and Dr. Squatch and a number of other, maybe not Dr. Squatch, but Squatty Potty for sure is one of their biggest clients that they had ran. And he was talking in this about there's different types of ad creatives that fulfill different types of purposes in general. There are the hardcore infomercials that are designed to sell, and they'll hard push you on why you should buy this product, all the features, yada, yada. Then on the flip side, you have very brand awareness-y campaigns that are just brand building, but they don't have a direct call to action or a conversion aspect to them. And they're just supposed to make you feel something and feel inclined positively about the brand. And then somewhere in between is where the golden ad is, and where you can get great conversions out of an ad while also building a positive reputation for the product. And I think this ad kind of facilitates something more in the middle there, but almost the worst of both of those two things and smushed it together, where I do think they attempted to build some brand awareness out of like, hey, let's create these jingles. Let's talk about a summer day in Paris. You're creating this fictional scenario that you're in. And then there's also this offer at the end that's supposed to incentivize you to buy. But the biggest thing that I'm missing in here is knowing now that this is the host giving the ad is, have you actually used this product? Like, where has this impacted and changed your life if this is supposed to be an endorsement? That is the thing that I think would have added a lot of value into this read itself that would have just changed it from top to bottom. Other than that, though, I love that it probably fits contextually into the podcast really well from a jingle standpoint. They're talking about sounds. They're talking about audio. Audio is so important to this podcast that learning on a mobile app how to speak audibly for other people is such a way that you could integrate this better into the content. Like, your content is about this kind of stuff. And so I'm like, you have an opportunity to go deeper here. And that is the only thing I'm judging it against, the content. They could do an even better job that would fit to their audience. It's not bad though. It's okay. I'm content with it. The only other one takeaway that I'm going to say docks them a point in my books is right before this ad, the last thing that they said was, that's all coming up after this break. And that is the biggest symbol to me that like, oh, everybody pull out your phones and hit that skip button because an ad's about to get. I'm like, oh, nobody wants to be prompted that they're about to get an ad. Just give them the ad, at least from an advertiser's perspective. Don't warn your listeners that an ad's coming.
Well, and we've talked about that before too, Adam, right? Like there has to be, in order to like, whether it's FTC guidelines or whatever it is, like you have to at least tell people that this is an ad, but there's other ways to do it, right? Like we are so thankful to our sponsors, Babbel or something, right? Like it's a little more content rather than stay tuned for these ads, you know, or like now for a commercial break. You know, the only thing that I was just thinking about that I think they probably could have done a better job at is, you know, most people have heard of Babbel, most people have heard of Duolingo. There's lots of, you know, Rosetta Stone, all of those like learning language stuff. Why are they different? Like, why would I use that? Especially like Duolingo, like they are the largest. They have like this mass appeal. And so like, and they do a really good job of sort of like talking about like why they're different and why it makes you or helps you learn. Well, you know, he brought up this like learn a language in 3 weeks or something. Like how, what do you guys do? Is it a game based? Is it, you know, how is this better than any other language app? And I think that was missed, you know, which again makes me think this is more of a brand awareness ad, but they did have that offer. So I think there probably could have been a little more, you know, information around like what is Babbel, you know, learning with Babbel actually look like, and why is this app so cool?
I agree.
Yeah. I think keeping both of y'all's points in mind, they could have improved. He could have told his own story. Like he could have still incorporated all of the sound effects. He could have incorporated the music. But he could have told his own story of how he used Babbel, or maybe where it impacted, you know, his life, or, you know, maybe when he was like, man, pre-Babbel, I found myself in this situation and it sucked. So no, I totally agree with everything that y'all are saying.
I have what I think could be such a great hook for this ad for their context of their show. Every episode, they're talking about a particular sound. What if they opened up with like, in today's episode, we're doing this sound or whatever, but if what would this sound like in French? What would this sound like in whatever, as a opposed question to lead in as a hook and to say like, well, we may not be able to replicate this sound in French, but you might be able to learn French in as little as 3 weeks with the help of our sponsor, Babbel.
Wow.
You could lead right into it that way. And I think that would be such a more impactful way to hook into your content that creates a value for your listener while still giving a great read for the ad that you don't have to change much else afterwards.
That's so beautiful. I love that. I totally agree with that. Okay, should we give it some scores?
Sure.
All right, go ahead,
Amelia,
Adam.
No, you got to kick this one off.
All right.
You start it.
You know, I'm going to say a 5.
I will match you with a 5. I think comparing to the other 2 reads, I think this read is just as satisfactory as the Matt Walsh read, where it doesn't really go deep. It doesn't really fail on any point where you're like, they still talked about the product. They said the discount. They hit all the things that they were supposed to say. It just doesn't have a lot of flavor beyond that, aside from the fact that there's a jingle aspect to it that makes it feel like commercially, but I would still call it a 5.
Okay.
So I'm mostly aligned. I'm going to give it a 6.
Okay.
I thought it was, you know, it was fine. I like the sound effects. I like the way that it fits into the context of the show. And I know that this part is subjective. As a listener, it just happened to hit me at the right time. Like I mentioned, I've recently moved and I've found myself in an area where knowing Spanish would be beneficial. And so it just happened to hit me at the right time. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe I do need to look into Babbel.
That's great. I mean, that's like, I'm sure that's not everybody's experience, but that's probably exactly what they were going for. You know, that 20% of the people that are listening are probably going through that exact thought process in your mind, whether they moved or whether they're in an area where they're, you know, have tried to order a restaurant. And they're like, shit, it would be so great if I knew this.
Exactly. Yeah.
Love that. I love that. So you gave it a 6, Adam 5, and 5 for me. Neat. Well, this was great. I do want to sort of end this episode on some just like high level thoughts and themes and stuff that we talked about. So, you know, there's lots of different ways to like score ads, right? We use this like metrics of 10, right? And, you know, make better. And then at Podscribe with our, you know, AI ChatGPT feature for automated like ad scoring, we also use a scale of 10. I think all of that sort of arbitrary. We had Stu on, he's got this whole, you know, crazy like 71 data point sort of stuff. And I know that there's probably a lot of different, you know, ways in which you grade them. Do you guys have one in particular? Like, how do you think about grading or scoring ad creative if you do that internally when you're reviewing performance and looking at the air checks?
So we do have an internal system very similar to you guys. It is on a scale from 1 to 10, but each piece within that 10 also has a smaller scale from like 1 to 5. And so we try to look at each piece a little bit differently. So, how would we score an endorsement from like 0 being no endorsement to 5 being, very strong. It's very personal. They love the product. It's impacted their life. And then we also have a separate score where we score the delivery, because I do think that it's important to look at those separately, because you can have an excellent endorsement and very poor delivery. Could be very
and
dull.
Delivery in your mind means like the tone?
So, yes, the tone. Are they genuine? Was it interesting? Did they do something different out of the box? So like I mentioned, I could come on and be like, well, I love Babbel. You can go try out my code. Maybe I'm having a bad day, but it's just kind of like, I don't sound invested. But then you could also have on the flip side, you could have people who are very excited sounding. They're very engaged. They're very animated, but they never actually use any I statements. They never actually say, I love this product. So we try to look at it. Those are our two kind of those are the like heaviest parts of our score, right? And so we try to look at that and we say, okay, like within the delivery, does it fit within their show? Are they engaged? Do they want to be doing this read? And then, then the endorsement, like how well did they actually speak to the product? So we do have our own internal scoring system that we use. I think ours is like 12 points, but it is on a scale from 1 to 10, and we try to use all of that to take an overall look at creative, and then what recommendations can we make internally, whether it be directly to the host, or do we need to change creative as a whole? Because that is also something that I think it's important for brands to look at. If the majority of hosts seem to be struggling with your creative messaging, maybe we need to make some changes that they can align with a little bit better.
Yeah. I love the delivery piece, because I personally think that's so important, like sentiment analysis and like delivery and tone and inflections. And, like you said, like the tangible, like they're engaged and they're invested in this. I think that it actually gets really overlooked. And that's one of the hard things about, podcast ads being an audio medium, right? Is first we transcribe them so you can see them and you can actually follow along and read it and see what they actually said. But then there's the actual very, very critical, delivery piece. Again, those tones and those inflections. And I think that, I can't speak for everybody, but I think that sometimes gets missed in some of the grading. And for me, at least, that's a really, really important piece. I'm a very energetic and fast talking person. And so when somebody comes on and they're like, I fucking love Babbel, like this, took my learning Spanish from 0 to 100 or something, like I am listening. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like I'm matching that enthusiasm and stuff. So I love that you guys take that in consideration as well.
Yeah.
If you're a podcaster that wants your ad reviewed, as long as you speak it fast, Amelia will give you a good grade.
basically, and it's nonsense like the previous one, huh?
Adam, you mentioned Bill Burr and Sherry's Berries, and that was one of the very first accounts that I ever worked on when I started working for Ad Results. So I have a very strong and some fond memories of it. But I think Bill is a really good example of his reads, or his delivery is really funny. He's sometimes sarcastic, sometimes he gets lost in his copy, but there's always an entertaining element about it. And so that's something that we would always keep in mind, because it really resonated with his listeners, even if he never said, I love Sherry's Berries. Just the way that he delivered on the creative was very engaging.
Look, at the end of the day, if you're a podcaster and you're doing an ad, you are basically stealing time away from your audience that they came for your content, not for the ad in the first place. And so if you don't give them a good payoff in some capacity through that ad, you're taking away their attention from what they came for. And you will slowly deteriorate them if you're only doing reads that they don't want to hear, that aren't entertaining, that aren't engaging. So even if it's a product that you fully don't understand, you still owe it to your audience to do a good job on that read, because you're going to suffer as a podcaster if you don't do a good job on your ad reads, because your audience will know. They know that you're checking out on everything. So care about the ad reads. It will make an impact on your audience at the very end of the day. Part of the reason why I imagine Jim Cornette's listeners still love him and his ads is because his ads feel like content. Even if they go a little long, Jim, I think most of your audience doesn't care that much, because I imagine that is just what they came for.
That's so great. It would be really cool, Adam, to have like an actual creator on one of these episodes and like have them share their thoughts. What?
Jim Cornette, you want to come on?
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah, call Jim.
Yeah, we'll call Jim up.
Call him up. No, but that would be really cool because I think, I at least come to this podcast being like, how can we teach advertisers those best practices and how can they, provide all of the important information to the hosts and stuff. But it's another thing. And, one of the last episodes we just did, Adam, was like us trying to give ad reads and, live and stuff. And it's pretty tricky and it takes a lot more thought and and not necessarily like I'm writing out a script, right? Because then you lose that authenticity, but you have to have those like stories in your mind. You have to have that like, how am I gonna relate this to something that I my audience has listened to and stuff like that. And I think that's we probably don't give enough credit to the actual creators and stuff that are reading that. So it'd be really cool to have somebody on that talks about that experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, cool. Any other high level thoughts, themes to sort of round this episode out?
You mentioned best practices. I think
I would love to hear your like 3 most important ones, Lindsay.
Oh my gosh. Oh, I had one. I mean, I've got,
Okay.
I've got
One's
multiples.
fine too.
But I would say that the biggest one that I encourage brands to keep in mind is just trust the host. They know their audience and they are going to deliver a read that resonates with them, even if it feels dry or chaotic or whatever. Like, they know this is what my audience is used to. This is what they want to hear, especially if you're working with comedy folks. If you don't mind, I have a great example that is stuck with me over the years. It was a stamps.com read on Risk. Kevin Allison, he wrote a whole song for Stamps, and it connected with his audience in such a way that at his live shows they would like sing the Stamps song.
That's amazing.
And so it was a very interesting take. It was a little odd, and at the time, maybe it didn't quite like hit all of the bullet points that they had wanted, but listeners were like, I'm here for this. I'm here for Stamps. I love this. And, for me, like, this was years ago, like way pre-COVID, and that stuck with me. And I think it's just very important when thinking about your creative to trust the creators and really just let them have fun with it. And, just be willing to merge your brand voice with their voice.
Yep. I totally agree. I think it's a hard thing to sort of get to accept, right? As like, especially like for bigger brands and stuff like that, to trust the person is going to do, talk about the product as best they can, but in a context and in a way that fits their audience. That can be kind of scary for a lot of brands, but I totally agree. Cool. Any other thoughts, Adam?
No, but to wrap this up on my end, I want to go back to where Lindsay pulled us in at the very beginning in talking about integrated content. And as we left off on the last ad that we were listening to with Babbel, I'm reading through some of the transcript of what comes right after that in the read. And as a part of the 20,000 Hertz podcast, they do a mystery sound every episode where it's a mystery sound that then people can send in a guess as to where that sound comes from or whatever. And I think that would be such a beautiful opportunity for an integrated piece of content there from a sponsor, maybe like Babbel, where they're saying like, here's the sound in English, French, and Spanish, or whatever it is, as like a subtle quip, whatever it could be. It could be some form of engagement there that just goes a little bit beyond the ad read into a more integrated partnership. And I think that if you're a podcaster, you have a unique segment. When I hosted my show, I had a segment where I'd talk about the coffee that I was brewing every morning, and then I had a coffee sponsor. It was such a great integration there. Those moments are some of the more impactful ones, I think, for brands at the end of the day, because they become part of the content, part of the narrative of the show, and it becomes part of the community itself. That then, like you were saying, Lindsay, the stamp song, it becomes something that people just talk about. The amount of people that would share on their Instagram stories about the coffee time on my podcast and the brand of coffee, and they're like, oh, I'm going to order that one so I can drink it with you on the show next week when I'm listening. I'm like, okay, awesome. And we would have those experiences. So the more you can integrate the products into the content, less than an ad or less like an ad, the better it'll be for everybody. I love that direction. And I really, really hope that's what the future of podcasting looks like, is more integrated.
I love it. Well, awesome. Thank you guys so much. And Lindsay, thank you. This was amazing. We'll have to have you back on again. And we want to hear more of the, how you guys are changing the narrative around the 60-second ad, because I'm really excited to see some of those results and all of that sort of stuff. So thank you again. If you're not familiar with Ad Results Media, go check them out. Stay tuned for lots of other exciting, fun episodes from Make Better.
Amelia, why do we do this podcast?
It's something about like making bad or good or better. No, yeah. It's why make good when we make better.
Good?
Yeah. Why make good?
Better, right? Exactly.
Be better. Just everybody be better. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Lindsay. Good luck with your move, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. This was so much fun.
Woohoo.